Maybe before we blow out the candle, would you mind telling us a bit about the place?
Sure. So this is the Saddamsville Rectory, and there are a lot of pretty disturbing stories about the place, one of which is perhaps the most famous. They say this priest, Donald MacLeod, went to give a lady her last rites, and he never came back. He was hit by a train, and he apparently haunts the joint. And there have been sightings of him and other ghosts and strange disturbances in the place, so they say. I find it all pretty dubious, but it is spooky.
All right.
Should we blow it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had been wanting to make a haunted house movie for a long time with a ghost that was represented by someone wearing a bed sheet, because I just thought that was a really funny idea, and that it represents something technically so profound. And I was having just a little bit of an existential freak out about time and other big, heavy matters that most people have. And I also was thinking about moving at various points during the inception of this project, and all of those things sort of spontaneously combusted into a 10-page outline that I sent to Toby and James and said we should make this in the summer of 2016, and we were off to the races.
You know, you get a 10-page outline from David. I don't know, it's always a yes, like, wow, that's really exciting. Like, I want to see that. There's always a hook.
Actually, before you sent the script even, I remember you sending us just a picture. I don't know if it was from an artist, and it was just a picture of a guy on a sheet. Do you remember that picture?
Oh, yeah. I took a bunch of Gregory Crewdson photographs and photoshopped a ghost in a sheet into them.
Yeah.
And said that would
That's how it started.
Casey, how did David share it with you? How does that work for you guys?
I can't remember. I think he called me up and said, I have an idea and I'll send you an outline. I don't know. There's some people you know are going to just make something interesting or good, or at least that the process is going to be something that's fun or that makes you better or that is worth spending your time on. And these guys are all of their movies are like that. So even if it was just a text about, would you mind being in a ghost movie where you're mostly under a sheet, you kind of just say yes because the odds are that it'll end up being great or that you'll just have a really good time.
I look back at it and it's very small and minuscule and handmade, but the actual process of making it and the logistics of making it felt just as big, if not bigger, than anything else we've ever done.
I think if you were going to distill all the challenges and whatever it took to make this movie all into like one prime example, I think the actual costume is to me that seemed like almost the most challenging thing that the production faced.
I don't know if that's true.
But no, it's a good representation of it, where we're just like, oh, this is going to be really easy. We're just going to put a sheet over someone's head.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
that's
got
true.
holes in the eyes.
And it became so much more than that.
No. David is very, you're very easy to throw ideas at. I don't ever fear whether or not I can pose a question or pose a thought or try and find something creative. And I started putting sheets over my head at home and cutting out the eyes and like taking pictures of myself to see how that would actually look and if it would stay and if the sheet was big enough. And none of it would. And so it's, okay, so how do we erase the person underneath and make it seem like it's just a sheet floating in space?
It is a lot hard. You have to make it a shape. You have to reduce it to a shape and remove we had to remove Casey from it.
Basically. Oh no, you just have to like build a helmet, build a face, and then build the shape that you want it to be on the outside, on the inside.
It was tough because you had to, even though it's a child's Halloween costume, it had to have gravity to it. And so performing under it or photographing it became an incredible challenge because it is so easy for that shape and that visage to become comical in a way that we didn't want. It would become too goofy sometimes. And we ended up having to, really learn how to photograph the character. It required a lot of careful blocking and And just also a lot of just throwing out the ideas that we'd had and kind of reforming our approaches on the spot.
Yeah, and you want him to feel elegant as opposed to a child in a costume.
By the end, you sort of like had a better handle on the position or the ways that the ghost would stand in the frame and things like that. Like, can you put into words what that was?
Stillness. I mean, it just really came down a lot to a greater degree of stillness. At least that's my perspective on it, because gradually we realized that the less movement there was, the more of an impact he had. And there were times where movement was very necessary. But Casey, I don't know if you have many memories of that day, and the first day you wore it in the hospital.
That might have been the most important shot in some ways of the movie, because if people laugh, you're going to be in trouble. And that's when you're introducing the ghost for the first time, right?
Exactly.
As a thing under a sheet.
Yeah.
So,
And I feel like you gave it some character in a way, the way you kind of like slink up and you were able to pause and give it some drama of that moment before your feet hit the ground. And
thank you.
I don't know how inside baseball you want to get, but do you want to talk a little bit about how that shot was set up?
Well, the trick was that Rooney had to lift up the sheet,
Right.
see that it was Casey, put it back on.
All in one shot.
And
All
then,
in one shot, no cutting.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And there was a special fold to it, wasn't there?
Is it an accordion?
It's an old fold to produce a handkerchief on stage from pre-vaudeville magicians. I mean, this is really old technique, and we just said, well, it's a giant handkerchief. Just make it appear the same way that a stage magician would do.
Andrew, what was your memory of getting involved in this?
Toby and I had breakfast, and he mentioned the idea and asked if I would want to read it. And I read it quickly and was really amazed that I could relate to the ghost in a way, like watching time pass. I think I'd been thinking a lot about death lately, but also just like it seemed like a great opportunity for a DP in general. Not much dialogue. So much of the film is done through the camera.
And our approach to it was, how do we get the maximum amount of emotional narrative information as well as the right mood out of, the fewest and most simplest number of compositions possible.
And since this is a story that is told about 90% visually, the movement of the camera must disappear. You can't be too self-referential.
Well, the challenge for me was, I think, always trying to be intentional emotionally. And is this shot emotionally true, or am I just moving the camera to move it, or trying as much as I could to be in the ghost's head, because he obviously is not verbalizing anything, and that's all we have to lean on.
The aspect ratio is so unique. Why does it work so well, do you think?
As a filmmaker, I tend to think in widescreen. I think in rectangles. And yet I love the constriction of a 1:3:1 aspect ratio. But most films nowadays don't use that aspect ratio unless they're trying to make a statement. And I think that's a worthwhile reason to use it. And so because of that, I began to think of it as a very imposing frame. It doesn't have the embrace of a widescreen image. It doesn't wrap around you the way widescreen does. And I always wanted to find a project that I could use it on. And one of the reasons that this one immediately felt right was because this ghost is trapped, he's stuck. And I felt that the constriction of the 1:3:3 would be really effective. And so it was never a conversation. It was never a moment where we were like, should we not do this? But we did find early on in the early days of shooting that it didn't come naturally to us. There was a big learning curve in using this aspect ratio, because indeed we do think, when we're thinking cinematically, we think in rectangles and widescreen. And figuring out how to best use this square was a big challenge.
This movie is so broad, I guess, and it goes through cosmic and through time, and I felt like if we didn't somehow make the frame still airy and and not feel claustrophobic. You know, if we could figure out a way to keep it wide, you know, that was like hugely important.
And the ghost takes
and the
up
ghost would be
space.
so dominant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could shoot a shot of a human being and it would feel fine, and then the ghost would enter the frame, and all of a sudden the frame would just shrink in a way because the ghost took up so much space, and not even physical space. It's just like it's such a dominant image.
Visually dominant shape, yeah.
I'm glad we stuck to our guns and did it, because it not only makes the film visually unique, but it does have that cumulative impact that I was hoping for.
Like, were you talking about what you wanted the house to be before we found the house?
I mean, it was meant to be like the house that I had lived in prior to moving to Los Angeles. And I just wanted it to look and feel like that. But it also had to change many times over the course of the movie. Again, in concept, I was thinking, oh, we'll just, take half a day and just move all the furniture out and put new furniture in. But it takes a lot of work to make a house feel lived in and to make it feel like there's a life there. And so creating that was a challenge that I certainly was not anticipating to be as big of a deal as it was, but there were many late night painting parties to get the house back to a certain state. And then
I loved that about this film, that there was a moment that we all, it's obviously a small film, but all departments, producers included, everybody's there and we're all painting.
After wrap,
Yeah, that's incredible. It doesn't happen on any film, hardly I've ever worked on, where everybody's willing to hang out a few hours after set and do that.
We build our legacy piece by piece, and maybe the whole world will remember you, or maybe just a couple of people, but you do what you can to make sure you're still around after you're gone.
the monologue that Will Oldham performs was something I had written long before this movie came into being, and I had just written it spontaneously and thought perhaps it would be the opening scene of another movie. And then as I was working on this project, the themes of it and the ideas were all so relevant to what that monologue expresses that I felt that this would be the right home for it. And so I just dropped it right in, and it just, that was it. And it became one of the chapters of the movie.
Wait, who here has kids? Your kids are gonna die. Yours too. Hey, just saying, they're all gonna die.
You know, conveying an entire sense of history in what was essentially a 16-minute monologue. And so I knew that he would be someone who could hold the screen for that length of time, delivering a bit of dialogue that would go on for that length of time. And also, it comes at a point in the movie where you haven't heard anyone speak in quite a while. And so it's sort of a reprieve for audiences who have been, you know, by that point conditioned into accepting the silence of the film, but also it takes the film in a completely new direction.
Every atom in this dimension will be pulled apart by a force as simple as...
What it's about is dealing with the passage of time and reconciling oneself to the inevitability of that, and that seeming meaninglessness of everything when placed against the context of time. And that's something that, you know, is, as a human being, is easy to get really troubled by. I like kind of playing off of self-made mythology. So the idea of taking the two of you who had done so well together in my second film, like letting that legacy sort of seep into this movie in an unofficial way it made me happy. I like that sort of meta continuity. And the characters in this movie, you know, never even had full names in the script. They were just initials because I wanted them to sort of feel more like representations of people than actual people. But then getting the two of you in there to have that, you know, that sense of shared history that kind of turned them into three-dimensional characters far more than I initially intended when I wrote the script, and it's great to have that.
There's something about the relationship that evolves on screen if you see all of those movies, and even though they're changing, they're playing different characters, and not that they have to be a couple as she and I were in both of those movies, but once you see them playing all those parts together, it deepens the relationship in each movie.
What did Casey and Rooney both bring to their roles?
They just had an incredible chemistry together. They work really well together. They bounce off one another really well, and they care for one another. And what was not meant to be a love story would probably become one, because I knew that their chemistry was going to be a very defining aspect of the opening act of the movie. And then Casey's absence as a human character would be something that Rooney would respond to on screen, and that she would illustrate his absence in a very profound and meaningful way. And, you know, I think we found many times that what we intended to be a big wide shot gradually got closer and closer and tighter and tighter, and would become a close-up because we wanted to see what was going on in her face. And what was often going on was missing Casey and missing his character. And that was something, once again, that we had not really anticipated, but that we realized we needed to make sure we got into the movie, because it was really going to define the emotional core of the film in a very meaningful way.
You know, it's always the same working with David and Toby and James. Their sets are uniquely relaxed in a really wonderful way. There's nothing like it. It's conducive to all kinds of collaboration and being experimental in ways that you don't always get the space to or don't feel comfortable doing in other movies. David allows for everyone to feel like they're a part of a team that's making a movie.
You know, that sense of we're discovering something new and we're creating something new, and like, I'll take your ideas and we'll just kind of like spitball them back and forth and create new stuff in the spur of the moment. And that stuff always winds up being in the movie, and at the same time, the movie always winds up feeling exactly like the script, which is
an indication that people are
they're on the same page.
It's very important when you trust the people that you're working with. It just makes all the difference. And the best movies that I've been a part of have been the ones where everyone has trusted each other, so that they feel like they can make mistakes and that they can be guided by all the people around them. And I think David, Toby, and James gather people together who are like-minded and also care a lot about what they're making, and find that balance between being like-minded but not all actually having the same ideas.
I don't know about you, but I never feel like I have that great of a grasp on the project when I'm working on it. It's always feeling like it's about to spin out of my grasp every second or spin out of control. And so we're just sort of discovering it as it goes. And then you get to the end of it and realize, oh wait, no, we did kind of know what we were doing the whole time.
It's true. It's a nice feeling when you realize that the stuff that you're discovering as it's coming out of you is just as interesting and important as the thing that you'd planned to say.
Do you want to talk, David, about the note?
The idea of home is something that's always been really important to me. And I remember moving out of the home that I grew up in when I was 8 years old, and just feeling like there was some sort of betrayal on my part to that space that I'd spent so much time in. And this is me at 7 years old having this very existential crisis about physical space and an environment. And I really felt like I needed to make sure there was something of me left behind there, because it felt like this place, and I had shared so much history together. And I loved the idea of hidden messages back then. I loved the idea of you could always go back and reclaim something. That's something that meant so much to you. You don't want to let go of it. And so you leave a little something there so that it's always you, it's always yours. So in this movie, obviously, it's Rooney leaving a little note in the wall.
At Sundance, you said you didn't see what Rooney wrote.
I mean, we talked about what it might say, what that note might say, and I told her just write whatever you see fit to write. And she did, and it's better to just understand that that's something that meant a lot to that person, and it's never going to mean as much to you as it would to her and as a character, and that in and of itself is a profound idea. And so just knowing that she has enough going on in her life and in her head and in her heart that she could write something that means something to her, that she would leave behind in a house that she's abandoning forever, that's all I need. That gives me everything I need. I don't need to know what words are actually on that paper or if there's anything at all.